Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the next community event that we are hosting at PMDojo. And I am so excited about this event. We are bringing Debjani Datta, Panda, sorry, for that, to talk about a very important topic. And that is about don't just break into product, but thrive. And it is something that is really near and dear to me because we all know that our career is a long game and we can't be thinking in short term. So let's deep dive. And again, welcome everyone for taking the time out of your busy day to be joining us. And thank you, Debjani, for joining with us today.
Thanks, Bosky. I'm super excited.
Awesome. And sorry for mispronouncing your last name. I have been in calls over the last couple hours, and I was talking with someone who had Debjani first name, and the last name was Datta. And she was also my very, very good friend as a kid. So I think that thing was just playing in my head, and I apologize.
Absolutely, no
So
worries.
before we get started, just a little bit of ground rules. Participate. This is your time to be asking questions. If there are certain things that relate to you and you find it helpful and useful, feel free to share it on socials, tag PM Dojo. This way we can share, all of these gems that Johnny is going to share with us with other folks who might not be able to join. So participate. Again, this is a very, very safe environment. If there are questions that you have, introduce yourself and ask those questions. We will try our best to be taking all of the participant questions and making sure that we are able to answer. And again, you can see on this slide, we have added all of our socials handles. And so feel free to tag, feel free to follow, feel free not to miss any of those upcoming events as well that PM Dojo is hosting. So, just a little bit before we get started, I'd love to introduce myself as well. I'm Bosky, and I am the founder of PM Dojo. And I am currently based out of Canada. And in terms of the agenda, we will be spending majority of the time, the next 40, 45 minutes, chatting with Debjani as a Q&A, kind of talking about how do you get into product, how do you find your first product, but also what happens after you get your first product role. How can you really sustain your career and thrive in it and figure out all of those ups and downs that come along your way. And of course, Q&A, but again, if there are questions that come as we're talking through, feel free to put them, share with them with us on the chat, and we will be picking them up and answering those questions. So just a little bit about PM Dojo as we begin, and I promise I'm not going to bore you. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, PM Dojo is a diverse and a global community that fosters learning and growing your career in product roles throughout throughout your career, not just for breaking into. We have community members from all over the world. We have lots of folks, both mentors as well as fellows from US. We also have a big community in Africa, Europe, Asia, and it's been really fascinating to see this little community that started with 2 people 2.5 years ago grow into pretty much all over the world. And our mission is really to make product careers more equal, accessible, diverse, and inclusive. And I know that these are very, very heavy words, but something that is so needed because we all know that there is this barrier for anyone to get into a product role. You find yourself in this catch 22 or chicken and egg problem. And even once you are in a product role, it is extremely hard to keep on climbing that ladder. And so this is something that we are really trying to democratize and create those equal opportunities, irrespective of where you come from, what your background is, whether you're someone who has tons of gap years and you're trying to struggle back to get back to work, or you might be someone who probably, maybe didn't have a lot of opportunities to have these careers for you. And we do quite a few different things to help our community members. Of course, we run and host these free community events like we are doing today. Make sure that you subscribe on our website so that you don't miss. We also have I think, two or three other some amazing events coming up for the rest of the year, including Marty Kagan. So if you make sure that you don't miss out on those. And of course, we have our flagship programs, which is our product accelerator, to help people get that real world experience so that you can make that transition journey into product a lot easier. But I'm not going to bore you with all of those. Let's get started talking to Debjani today. So, meet Debjani. She is a former senior product director at a company called GuardHat, and she has an amazing, amazing track record and tons of experience. So, with that, Debjani, welcome. Can you maybe introduce yourself and walk us through your journey?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Bosky. The work that you're doing at PMDojo is exemplary. And I wish this was there when I was kind of trying to get into product. And we can talk more on that. But thank you so much. And welcome, everyone. And I'm looking forward to a great session here, looking forward to the questions. A little bit about myself. I have been in the workforce for 20 plus years now. And I have promised Bosky I'll keep this short so that I don't go through the whole timeline here, but I started fresh out of college into Tata Consultancy Services as an engineer. So I was a programmer. TCS then was a startup. I was there when it went through IPO, and with the company growing, I grew into program management, customer, big deliveries, large, big teams all over the world. And then I moved to the US. And I really like mentioning this because I know many of us are in the same boat. And Bosky alluded to it. I actually took a 5-year hiatus from the workforce here to raise our two kids. I mean, I went through pregnancy and everything for 5 years. Did my MBA after that, got into HP, did corporate strategy, so a lot on the business side and planning, operations, etc. And then came this whole cloud boom. So moved into cloud transformation for bigger companies. And then in all of this, where again, there came another turn. So you can see that there was a lot of transition in my journey. So COVID happened and I was getting very antsy. It was like, oh, what am I doing? I'm not making an impact. And then I joined the startup. God had a great mission. We work for the frontline workers, keeping them safe, productive, making sure they get home. So it's a IIoT, heavily technical, which I love because again, it connects me to my electrical engineering background and the roots and starting as a programmer. So, and yes, right now I'm again in the market. Kind of again looking for my next gig, just like some of you or many of you, and here to answer some questions and have a great discussion. Thanks, boss.
Wow, thank you, Devjani. I completely forgot a few of those things that I think we talked about when we first met. Um, I have a couple questions as I was just listening to you. You mentioned about the hiatus that you took, and it was 5 years, right? Was it altogether 5 years, or was it broken down and spread out?
No, so what happened is I was the first year after Manav, our older one, was born. I was ready to get back to work, and then it was just a big surprise that I found myself I was pregnant. So I had back-to-back kids. So there was no time for breaking it down. All my planning went haywire. I just decided to first year I was like, okay, I can take a sabbatical. I tried that. It didn't work out, so I just quit because two kids back to back, it was just too much. So yeah, it was not broken down. It was a full 5 years.
Five years.
just babies.
Diapers, babies, solid food,
Absolutely.
and all
Yeah.
the good stuff. So tell me a little bit, Devjani, were you nervous getting back to work? How did you deal with, did you feel like maybe the tech industry moved way ahead? What were you thinking as you were going through, and what helped you, and how did you make that getting back to the workforce?
Absolutely, Bosky. I mean, first off, let me mention this. Like, there are many people who are like, oh, that's great. You had these boys back to back. You are now done and you can get to the workforce. It doesn't work that way. I would even not advise, or even my closest enemies, to have kids back to back. Or if you have twins, you can't help. So So yeah, first couple of years I did not quite understand what was going on. I was sort of happy in the motherhood, but then I had more anxiety and the whole feeling of what's happening. This is, oh, I was miserable, and that's a true feeling. Then towards the later years, it was still kind of getting a little better. My husband was traveling a lot. We decided to get a nanny, and all that was happening. And when Mana went to kindergarten, and that's when I said, okay, this is now time that he starts school. Probably I should also, because when I woke up one fine day and I saw that, as you mentioned, the world has moved. It was what I left off and where I was 5 years. It was a drastic change. So I needed to upskill. And not knowing any better, I knew I had to do an MBA because that's the first thing that kind of everybody goes to. But I'm glad I did that. I went to UT Austin, so that was a great time. And my husband pitched in both the boys. I handed over to him, and I kind of spent the next 2 years doing that. But this was not just the MBA. In parallel, I joined the workforce. Getting into the workforce wasn't easy. It was hard. This was the first time I was trying to get into the American workforce. All this time I was in the Indian company. So, and foot in the door, right? As you said, all of that, I started with contracting and then kind of went in, then got confirmed, and then through MBA got into HP. So, yeah, many things happen. And again, when I look back, when I see these resources and what we are going to talk about, if any of these were there, it would have made it infinitely easier and less anxious and less of those troublesome feelings that I had.
Wow, I can so relate to it. All those maneuvering that we have to go through when we're trying to get our foot at the door. And of course, I think as an immigrant, it adds all those challenges because I can speak, I think, from US. I cannot speak other countries. I came to US to study, and I think for the longest period of time, I was known as the alien from an immigration standpoint. So I think it also adds an interesting mix. I think just psychology from a psychological standpoint, and I think your own motivation. Like I would often feel like, why am I being called an alien out here? Every time you have to kind of cross the border, you would go in the alien line and not in any other. I totally, it brings back all of those memories from years ago. We have a few questions that we received from some of the folks who had registered for the event. So let's kind of start pulling some of those questions in. And again, for folks who are joining with us, feel free to send in your questions, and we will also start looking and picking up the audience questions as well. So I think the first question that a lot of people will ask, and a lot of people ask, is what are some of the ways that you can make that transition into your first product role if you have never worked as a product manager before? I would love your perspective. I know we can also share a lot of resources as well on the chat, but would love to hear from you, Debjani.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Bosky. And this is a very apt question for me because as you see, when I spoke about my journey and all, I never really mentioned product or product management or anything. But that's where the beauty lies. Product management role is multifaceted. Chances are, and I would actually go out on a limb and say 99% chances are you have actually worked on one of these. So what I mean by that is whatever you have worked, there's nothing called no experience. There is nothing called foot in the door. I mean, we understand those names, but really you are there. All you need to do is that connect the dots. First of all, understand what product management entails, and it's huge. So there's a big bucket there. And then connect the dots, highlight them, and create the narrative, like internalize, because that's what you are, what you have done. Create that narrative in resumes or talking, forums, anywhere, so you get good at it. And what I mean by those buckets, like very broad, and again, we can drill down into each of them, and you will find various resources on the web to go through this. But it boils down to four major things in product management. is the customer, obviously, is the customer insight. So you think about data, design, voice of customers, and again, see if you have done any of these. Maybe, maybe not. Second, two more buckets are the product strategy and execution. So strategy is more about the high level vision, roadmap, how are you innovating? And then the execution is the meat of product management, which many of them, many ways we kind of think is only that part is product management, where you go into QC, delivery, and the feature set, right? So that's not just product management, but that's a part, obviously. And finally, and most important, influencing people. Like,
Mm.
that's the, again, the big thing, and that is where the gap lies. So if you have done stakeholder management, if you have done team leadership, I met up with a very successful manager who started as a customer service agent, like it's call center. So that's where you just connect the dot. Okay, so you have influenced people, you have talked to customer, so yeah, check how much, and then kind of you can measure yourself and then build that narrative. As I said, that's super important.
You hit on some very, very important points, Devjani. I think that a narrative or the storytelling that we have to internalize and believe, that these are some of the things that we have done that can be transferred over to the role that we are trying. It's very, very important. And if we don't believe it, then of course we can never make the other person or the company, the hiring manager, the recruiter believe it. I remember there was this HR person many, many, many years ago, and I was trying for an internal role, and she basically told me, Bosky, you got to believe you are the job. Tell yourself you are the job. And it sounded absurd and it sounded really, really strange. Like, how can I be the job? But I think that constant thing, it's almost like a positive affirmation and manifestation. And I kept on telling that to myself because the role was way out of league for me. Like, there were so many things from a job description standpoint that I was not meeting. I did get the job, but it was just interesting to see how much that narrative was important. And of course, didn't just start and end with I am the job, but there were a whole bunch of things that I had to do to believe in myself so that I could speak confidently. And you're right. I often kind of tell people there are things that you do in your current role, doesn't matter what it is, even if you are someone who completely has a non-traditional background. Like, we see so many people in PMDojo who come from a nursing background, who are working as radiologists in a radiology lab, teachers. You wouldn't think of them as having traditional tech background or even worked at a tech company, and they go through, and they're in product management roles. And for example, you may have improved a process.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, if you're able to kind of narrate that and speak to it in terms of what was the impact and what was your thought process, I think that becomes so powerful. Of course, there are also that upskilling aspect that you mentioned in your own career journey, right? We all have gaps. And I think it's really important to identify where those gaps are so that we can address it.
Yeah, as you say, it's a lot of self introspection. And again, it doesn't have to be solitary. There is a lot of resources you can, but of course, you have to go inwards a lot, understand, and then bounce it off with some
Absolutely.
in a safe place, and talk to people, and then make that narrative for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is one thing that in PMDojo we do a lot, right? We kind of really help with that mindset shift along with helping people get that real world experience. So, it kind of works really, really importantly because I think for being in a product management role, it's not just about templates and it's not just about filling those frameworks. It's much more than that. And it is how you think, right? How do you really approach problem solving? Um, the next question that I had that we received was, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. So let's say you are a newbie in a product role. Let's say you've gotten your first product role. Yay. Um, Most of the time, people will say, I'm just so overwhelmed. Like, I have no idea what is going on. How do I work? What do I do? What are some of the ways to gain sanity and get into this thriving mode and not just feel like you're constantly having to fly the plane while you're learning how to build it? That's how I felt in my first product role.
No, definitely. I mean, absolutely. I mean, feeling overwhelmed as a newbie anywhere is like a natural human instinct. It gets magnified in product because product touches a wide array of people, process, technology. So the whole feeling gets more scaled up version. So I believe the way you handle this and the way I did is kind of channel that apprehension and all the feeling that you have into this positivity where you are a newbie. That means you are hungry to learn, you're motivated, you have that, you're not complacent, you will do anything. So when you do that with I call it like a three pillars. While you're doing it, there are three things that you must be super good at, and those are the three things that you should look at. First, the knowledge is power. Like whatever you're good at, build on it. We talked about gaps. Do it and be, I mean, the best form there you can. Obviously, there is incremental, that there's no stopping. There will be incremental, but make sure that what you have, or whatever is your pillar among the four buckets I talked about, anything, drill down in those. Identify that and be super good at that. That takes away a lot of the apprehension and anxiety. Number two, at every opportunity, go hands on, which
Mm,
means go meet people, check out the competitors, go look at the market, technology, look at resources. I mean, any way, like pick up anything like a pencil, think about it, how you can improve it. Kind of go hands on and kind of have that conversation with yourself. It doesn't have to be in a group or a mock setting or anything. So that's the second advice. And finally, super, super, super important, and it worked for me, is find a mentor, a coach, and invest in that. So these people, the mentors and coaches, don't come with a label. Like you can't Google them. It could be anyone. It doesn't need to be like a certified person or not. So that is a biggest, like the community is there. Find someone you jive with, who listens to you, who eggs you on, makes you go become that better version of yourself every day. So those are the three things I think if we just work on, it just takes away the anxiety, and then whatever is left is good because that makes you work perform much better.
I would agree. I think looking back, I was, as you were mentioning that, Devjani, I was kind of thinking all through the times, every time I got into my new role, and this doesn't change. Even as someone with years of experience, if you join a new company, that feeling of overwhelm will come. And typically in a product role, I've I don't know if this happened only with me or it happens with a lot of people. Usually within your first few weeks, you will be asked for a roadmap. I mean, you're still trying to comprehend and
Yeah.
figure it out. I think for me, and I think everyone's personality is different, and I think everyone works differently, and what pushes them, and what are some of I think, our own areas where it can challenge us. But I think for me, having some sort of a plan in terms of figuring out what success might look like in your first 1 month, 2 month, 3 months was something that was really important for me. So before, early on in my career, I would wait for someone to get that for me and create that for me, because I would be like, okay, that should be something that's given to me. I just realized that it doesn't happen. And so I had to take that on my own hands, but then work with my manager. As part of my 30, 60, 90-day plan to co-create it and get that alignment. Because if I didn't know what success looks like, then it always felt like a moving target, and I could never know at the end of 3 months, did I achieve something? Did I get quick wins? What are some of the things? So I think that was something that was really important for me. I think the second thing was that at least in my first 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, it was really important that while I was able to get some of those big initiatives done, there were also some of these smaller wins that I could get, because that would be a boost of confidence for myself, but it will also help me establish that credibility, because I need that if I need champions in the organization to be believing in my work. So I think that was really important. And I think just being kind to yourself. I learned it very, very hard way much later on in my career, because I wanted to kind of understand and figure things out very, very quickly. And I often felt that I would start getting burnt out very, very early on when I joined the company, because I was just being so hard on myself. and it was impossible to understand, the market, the competition, the industry, how the company works, internal folks, having one-on-one coffee chats with people, trying to make sense of everything, trying to understand the data, at the same time trying to learn the product. Like, it's insane. And so I think just trying to be kind and be like, okay, you know what? I don't have to compare myself with someone who's been in the company for a long time. And as long as I'm pushing along and making sure that, I'm learning along the way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that you bring up a great point, Bosky. It's just that we have to understand what are the things we can control and what are the things out of. So those boundaries are super important. I know we start off eager as a newbie and want to do everything, but we have to pause and reflect that is it something that's really adding that incremental value or that major value that we are doing, and then scale back from there.
Absolutely. And ask for help.
Yep,
That was
definitely.
a good
That's
one.
where the mentor and coach or whoever asks for help. Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. I often forgot that, or I did not want to because I wanted to prove myself, right? And I think asking for help was something very naively. I used to be like, oh, if I ask for help, then they are going to think that I'm not worth it, right? But I think it's how you ask for help is really important. We just received a question, and that is around certifications. I obviously have my own how I feel about certifications, but the question is, should I get a certification to get a job as a product manager?
Yeah, the whole thing about certification, what does that even mean, right? I mean, what is it? I, I don't know. I think about certified doctors, nurses, kind of people, but how do you, based on what we chatted till now, right? The way product management, as ambiguous and as static it is, and the way it touches everything, how do you get certified? So that is something I always think about, and not to say that I didn't look into, kind of seeing what would certify. Because when I was in the program management, project management, I was I did PMP. That was a certification, but that was more studying a book, making sure I check all the boxes, I understand those, and then going in an examination and checking the boxes. So I don't know how you can put all these things of product management into a textbook and then check the boxes. To me, Bosky, I'm not very on board for a certification. Not nor did I find one.
It's good to hear that. You're right. I also looked at certifications, I think, early on in my career, because I think that is like very much an accepted norm, right? And if you are in any product community, usually on a daily basis, there's going to be at least one person who's asked that question. Is there a certification I can do that's going to make my candidacy look promising?
Mm-hmm.
And I've spoken with so many hiring managers, and every single time unanimously I hear a no. And you're right, because I think a product role is less scientific and it's more of a craft for in my mind, because at the end of the day you are working with people, and I think as humans we are very, very complex, and you cannot win every single argument by using a framework or a template. I think those can guide us, but contexts differ in every single situation. If you are part of a startup, a mid-sized company, large organization, it'll be different. Product looks different. How you do the job looks different. If you're in the middle of an acquisition, it'll look different. If you have reached product market fit, the role will look different. If you're pre-product market fit, it'll look different. If you're trying to sunset, it'll look different. And I just find it really, really absurd where this notion of certification exists. And so yes, there is just a resource on a blog that has been shared here about certifications and what does it really mean, and is it necessary to get into your product role. I'm 100% in agreement with Debjani out here. You don't. That doesn't take away from the effect that if you're wanting to learn something, you can always learn, and there are different ways to learn. But if you're thinking that the thing that is stopping you or preventing you or slowing down that career transition into a product role, and if you think that somehow certification is magically going to let you get into a product management role, I think that notion and belief, I think we need to challenge that. Right? Absolutely. Thank you, Debjani. We have another question here. Um, so, of course, this is a chicken and egg problem, right? So, you might have had some experiences in some another field, like yourself, like me. We all transitioned into product. Or maybe we are very fresh out of school. And so we basically start with no experience. How do you then build that experience? And especially the topic around side projects. It's again one of my favorite topics around side projects. But what are some of the ways? How do you think about a side project? I would love to hear from you, Dipchani.
Yeah, definitely. So let's define the side project, right? So there is a full time, either you're a student or you're doing a job, and then you're building something on the side. So the whole thing about product management is about building, right? So when I think of it, like for example, I was getting very bogged down. I still am. Thinking about school lunches, like every day is the same thing. I just try to ask my kid, can you just not buy lunch? No, there I can't eat there. It's just bad. So thinking about that problem space, and then kind of how is it that I can solve it and kind of get into application mode, like how I can actually provide some features. So it runs in my mind, and then building something on the side. Nowadays resources are plenty. With $0 invested, you can go online and actually build something which will, or even just a WhatsApp message group is a product, because now you are solving for the lunch problem. So that's just one example. So it comes in varied flavors. The initial thing is that don't get bogged down that you have to really build this fancy stuff which like works from day one, but it's the process. And forget building, it starts way before that. What is the pain point? What's the problem? How do you articulate it? Is there anything out there that kind of fulfills even one aspect? How would you do it if you were going to do? So that's the whole brainstorming. You need zero resources for that. It's just you yourself and maybe a notepad, and you just jot down and you kind of start, and then you talk to people.
Yeah.
So that's how, and again, it's a very layman's term, Bosky. I will kind of defer to you to give us more frameworks or templates for that. But that's how I do side projects to get into things.
I love this. I absolutely love this. I think side projects, it was really kind of born, and I feel like a lot of the engineers would be doing these tinkering side projects, right?
Yeah.
And I think it kind of comes from there. But I think something to note and I think about is that if you are trying to get into product management, even design, um, we get evaluated differently than engineers. We don't get evaluated based on what tools we know how to use or which tool stack we know or tech stack we know how to use. And it's really that process. And that is really what product mindset is, right? At the end of the day. And so I think a lot of the times, like you hit it right at the nail. Like a lot of the times I see candidates who have all of these different projects on their resume, side projects, but then when I start asking them questions, basically that thought process kind of falls flat because usually they will use a circle framework and they're all good. These are some solid frameworks, but it is not about following a checklist. Because in the real world, when you're building products, it rarely follows a checklist, which is why 90% of the ideas fail and 90% of the startups fail. Otherwise, every single idea would have been a success if it was all about following a checklist. But I think what, as a hiring manager, you really want to see is how did they think? What were some of the challenges that they came across? How did they overcome those challenges? It's not just painting a happy picture of, yeah, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. And so I feel like that piece misses on a lot of times. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be saving the world. It doesn't have to be your side projects. Don't have to be something where it is like a full blown product. There are so many no code and low code options available that have become, accessible to people that with $0 you can, right? So I totally agree. And there is this video out here in our community. I think there is one video. I was invited to interview and talk about side projects with Diego Granados, who is a senior product manager at LinkedIn and now at Microsoft. And we kind of go really into detail on the side projects. But You're absolutely right, Debjani. I think a lot of times when people think about side projects, immediately the two things that come into is what product shall I build, and what are the tools that I can use, and where do I find developers? Again, if you want to get experience working in a cross-functional team, you can go and seek friends, but those things come much later. The first thing that you mentioned was really trying to understand the problem. Who is the problem for? Doing some of that research and really trying to figure out, is this even worth it solving?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, Bosky.
Absolutely. Um, what are some of the let's say, how do I ask this? What are some of the lies or the myths that you have heard in your career? Um, they've become so prevalent, Debjani, that they're considered like almost facts and tenets these days. That if you have to get into a product management role, these are some of the things that you have to do. What are some of those that you've heard?
Yeah, definitely, Bosky. That's like the list is endless, and I know that I will keep it short. But the first one we already talked about, certification. That's a myth. That's a lie. You don't need to be certified product manager to get into product management, or neither if you are a product manager, that doesn't certify you to be a product manager. So vice versa, right? So number one. Number two, the one that I've heard is more like you have to have built a product end to end, which means what we spoke about, right? You would have to start it from the concept to the launch to scaling and taking it to market. You would have to do that. That's again not the mandatory. Even if you have touched a product in various life cycle, it could be different products. There could be missing gaps. You may not have even launched a product. Doesn't matter. But that's a myth that's perpetrated, Bosky. I've seen that everywhere, even in job description where it says that end
End
to
to end.
end experience. I don't know what that means. The, the other thing which kind of goes hand in hand is that, hey, you should have startup experience. That is again, I feel is a myth. It's again, none of these are not good to have. Yes, definitely they help, and everybody understands startup is less resources, is crappy things, and you learn a lot and things like. But again, nothing mandatory, and you don't need that to be a product manager. The one that I really despise, which gets perpetrated, is that it has product management has this whole aura of loneliness, solo, individual contributor, work life balance, burnout. All of these things kind of come hand in hand with product management. That's not true. I mean, yes, it happens, but it doesn't have to. It's not like you have to accept it because you've heard that everybody is lonely, burnt out. But it doesn't have to be that way. And you can learn from our mistakes and people who have heard that and not get into that mode at all. So that's something which is super important, super, super important, the mental health. Otherwise, there's no way you can build a good product. So that's very important. And the one that I really kind of heard and got into this, and again, I'm guilty of it, is product management is glamorous. And that's a myth. That's a super myth. I mean, I can look glamorous, like deck up and come in and talk with Bosky and post it, paste it all over LinkedIn and all. But I'm down in the trenches. I'm out there in the rail yard talking to a operator who's running an engine. I'm in my boots going down. So there's nothing glamorous about it. Don't just look at the aspect of going into Vegas and presenting and conferences and great lunches and talks and all that doesn't exist. 90% is hard work and building something. And finally, I'll just touch upon this one is that you have to be technical. You have to be super, super technical to become a product manager. That's a myth. That's a lie. You can pick it up anytime. You can do a Coursera course and build up, but you do not have to be technical to be a product manager.
Absolutely. Love it. And you don't have to be a developer and learn how to code if you want to be a product manager. There are lots of different product management roles that you don't have to start with having a very strong technical background. Yes, having it helps, but you
Helps.
don't need it. Um, of course, if you're applying for technical product management roles, especially in IoT, API, platform type products, I think having that background does help. But I completely, completely agree. I think with everything that you said, I think one thing that stood out to me was I think the glamorous piece. I think, as I talk to people and I ask them, even when I hire people and I'm asking them, why are you interested in this role? Um, there are nuances and you can catch up on it. There is this glamour and aura, right? And whether it was this whole age old notion of being the CEO of the product, which really is not not a fact, or whether it's like, oh, well, I can kind of decide what to do, and all of those things. I don't think it exists, because at the end of the day, your job as a product manager is like a facilitator. You are facilitating your stakeholders, your leadership team, your cross functional teams, your own team, in bringing this holistic picture with evidence and fact, and also a story around what's happening with the customers, and really helping your teams move forward in making the right and the best decisions at the time, and making those trade off calls and facilitating that. And so it feels very much like a facilitator or an orchestrator in a symphony, and less about, I'm a driver in the bus and I'm going to be basically deciding where to go. I'm going to tell everyone what to do. 100%. It's a deeply impactful work, though, right? But at the same time, I think it's not all glamorous, just like any other role. I think one myth that I have encountered is, I'm going to basically decide, and then I'm going to start handing it off to my designer. I'm going to be handing off the requirements to my developer. I'm going to be handing off my requirements and my vision to my designer so that they can then design. I think that is a myth, because in the beginning, when you're in the problem discovery, you and your designer will have to partner up and collaborate, trying to figure out what the problem is. Same thing with the developer. You're going to be bringing them in, especially to start thinking about some of those feasibility aspects as well. So it's very much a partnership thing as opposed to handing it off. And I think a lot of people just believe in handing it off. Or if I learn Scrum, great. If I learn how to hand off and how to write requirements, I'm good, right? Absolutely, Debjani. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to look at, do we have any questions on the chat? Okay. Looking back on your career, Debjani, what would you do differently?
Yeah, great question, right? I'm still looking front and back both ways right now at a crossroads, right? You know what, Busky? I was thinking about it. I believe I would take risks. I did not take risks. And now I feel like, oh, I'm too old, or it's just not a good time. There are college, the kids have to go to college, kind of that feeling. So yeah, risk taking, failing, and not feeling shame. When I failed, I have felt shame. So that is something I would allow my younger self, give the permission not to feel shame, but own that failure, learn from it, and move on. So that's something which is super important, and I've learned it the hard way. And finally, and that hand in hand it goes, right? I would celebrate more of myself. As you said, be kind to yourself. I would celebrate this imperfectly perfect me. I know that's who I am. Yeah, because that's who I am, and that's what I will bring on the table and into the product for the customers, right? So that's where I think I would be a little more kind to myself, and celebrate and not feel the shame, take more risks and fail.
I love imperfectly perfect me. I think a lot of times I've heard people say imperfect me, but I like how you said imperfectly perfect me. So love it, love it, love it. Um, well, thank you so much, Debjani. We are 1 minute before the hour. There is a question that's come. Thank you, Abiodun, for asking the question. Are you a specialist at anything? What do you really say if you had to give an elevator pitch?
As a product, yeah. So good question, and I don't want to butcher your name, Abiodun. Thank you for the question. But yes, I spoke about knowledge is power, right? So there is one area which you are really good at, right? For me, that specialization is customer and empathy and understanding the pain points. I have throughout my journey from day one interacted with customers in between. When I was in corporate strategy, it was more internal, but then business and leadership was my customer. So customer doesn't mean the end user, or there are various flavors. So understanding who are my customers. Like right now, I lead ecosystem in the Godhead IIoT platform. Developers are my customers because I'm making the APIs more readily available. So they are my customers. So my specialization is understanding first who are the customers, different from stakeholders. So there's a nuance. For the customers, the empathy and understanding their pain point, somehow becoming one of them, like walking in their shoes, like a cliche. And that pain point, which even they couldn't have articulate or I couldn't have, but together we kind of bring into a statement, and then that problem is what we solve and bring. So that, again, it's not an elevator pitch, it is more like a almost like a building, Empire State Building pitch. But yes, that's what I'm special at.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it depends on how you define specialization as well, right? I
Oh,
feel
that's true.
like I feel like if you have a certain domain expertise, that could be your specialization. Like if someone has come from health, and so going
That's
into health tech, that could be a specialization as well. If you've traditionally worked in cloud becomes specialization, cloud technologies. Same thing with marketing and martech. I know, Abby. I should have kind of seen your face as you were asking the question. Abby is currently a fellow in PMDojo. I shouldn't have
okay.
butchered your name if I did. Um, but yeah, I think it depends. But I think as PMs, it's very important to, I think, specialize in problem solving more than anything. And yes, if your superpower is data, if your superpower is storytelling, if your superpower becomes really that customer obsession, you can always kind of use that to leverage yourself. Um, so thank you, Abby, for asking that question. I know we are 2 minutes past the hour. Thank you, Debjani. This was amazing to have you. Can't wait to collaborate with you in PM Dojo as well. And just a friendly reminder for anyone who is interested to learn and get real world experience, industry experience, we have three unique tracks: core track, industry track, and of course the light track. And so please check it out. We've just thrown the link on the chat. And again, happy to answer any questions or just connect with us and our team, and one of us should be able to get back to you. And with that, thank you so much.